You wake up beside the slow-moving Nile. The morning sun is already warm on your skin, and the reeds whisper as a breeze glides over the water. You're not royalty, not a scribe, just one of many in a long line of people whose job today, like every day, is laundry. You're standing barefoot on the muddy bank, with a worn pile of linen robes at your feet and a clay pot balanced near your hip. This is the beginning of a workday that will stretch under the Egyptian sun, involving sweat, flashes, and the kind of repetitive motions that would make a modern washing machine blush. The tools are simple. No soap, no buttons. No drum spinning at 1,000 revolutions per minute. Just water, earth, and patience. Laundry in ancient Egypt wasn't glamorous, but it was constant. Even the poorest Egyptians wore linen clothing, and all of it had to be clean somehow. You probably won't survive this job, not because it's dangerous, but because it's relentlessly boring. Just the way we like it. And if you're listening from somewhere far from the Nile, maybe your bedroom in Finland, your dorm room in Mumbai, or your couch in New Jersey, let me know your local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing to know, nobody back then was scrubbing clothes with bars of lye soap. That idea hadn't shown up yet. Instead, Egyptians headed to the river, mostly the Nile, where the current helped carry away whatever dirt clung to their clothes. You'd walk down with a stack of garments, often with a partner, because doing laundry solo meant double the time and effort. Water was everything here, but not just for rinsing, fetching it, carrying it, cooling off in it. Clothes were laid out on stones or spread across flattened river banks, and then stomped on with bare feet. Rhythmic, repetitive stomping, sort of like dancing. If dancing made your legs ache and your ankles muddy, it worked better than you'd think. The motion helped push dirt out from the fibers, and the river water washed it away. Historians still argue whether laundry was a daily task or a weekly one. Some say the heat and sand made daily washing impractical. Others argue linen was so prone to staining, people had no choice but to rinse and stomp often. But almost all agree, if you lived near the Nile, laundry was your version of a spa day, minus any of the actual relaxation. And don't imagine this as some peaceful riverside activity. There were crocodiles, there were bugs, and depending on the season, the river either overflowed or vanished. You'd better know when to go, or your clean laundry might float away or attract something scaly with too many teeth. Still, something about the water, the warmth, and the simple repetition of the task made it part of the ancient rhythm of life. Like the heartbeat of the Nile itself. Once the clothes were soaked and stomped on, it was time for scrubbing. But without soap, the question becomes, what exactly did they scrub with? Well, the answer is a dirt. Yes, dirt. Specifically, a type of fine clay known as fuller's earth. This natural substance had absorbent properties, which helped lift grease and oils from fabric. You'd take a handful of this soft earth and rub it into the linen. Gritty, yes, but surprisingly effective. It's like exfoliating, except you're exfoliating your clothing. In the absence of modern detergents, the ancient Egyptians got creative. Other cleaning agents included natron, a naturally occurring mixture of salt and baking soda scooped from dry lake beds. Who says divine ingredients can't pull double duty? There are even scattered mentions, though debated, of mashed up fruit rinds being used. Citrus wasn't native to Egypt, but wild sycamore, figs, and dates were. Did someone, centuries ago, discover that a bit of pulp helped with stubborn stains? Possibly. Historians still argue whether the practice was common or a fringe experiment by that one neighbor who always swore figs cured everything. And then there were the laundresses, the real experts of their time. These were mostly women who washed clothes not only for their own families but often for others too, sometimes even the nobility. Laundry was such a known trade that it appeared in paintings and inscriptions, always showing the same bent postures, the same swirls of river, the same stoic expressions of people who knew that getting linen clean was a daily war. One fragmentary scroll describes a team of washerwomen joking with each other as they beat tunics on flat stones. Imagine them laughing, gossiping, and occasionally smacking a stubborn stain as if it had personally offended them. Humans haven't changed much, and here's a curious side note: clean linen was actually associated with spiritual purity, which meant doing laundry wasn't just a chore. It was, in a small way, a sacred act. Wearing fresh linen before entering temples or attending rituals was considered essential. So in some roundabout way, you the weary washer by the Nile were helping maintain the cosmic order. Except when you weren't. Like that time you dropped your best tunic into the current and watched it drift off like a tiny, off-white sailboat. It happens. After scrubbing came the rinsing. And in ancient Egypt, rinsing wasn't just a splash-and-go situation. It was a process, a delicate dance of soaking, swirling, and squeezing under the hot Egyptian sun. You'd wade waist-deep into the Nile's shallows or crouch beside a large basin filled with clearer water if you were lucky enough to have it. Some communities built rinsing pools near canals just for this purpose. There, you'd dip the cloth again and again, squeezing the clay, natron, and whatever grime had been coaxed out. Of course, that Nile water wasn't always as clean as you'd like. Crocodiles weren't the only hazard. The river carried silt, plants, the occasional fish, and let's not forget hippos. Yes, hippos. More dangerous than crocodiles and often grumpier. People rinsing laundry had to keep one eye on their linens and the other on the waterline. Talk about multitasking. Some believe that reeds were used to swat excess water from garments before the final rinse. That's right, gentle reed smacking as an ancient form of wringing, efficient and satisfying. The rhythmic swish-swalk probably echoed across the riverbank like some early form of folk music. Laundry jazz. One curious debate among scholars involves the exact water technique used. Did they stir the cloth in wide figure eights, or was it more of a folding and enfolding swirl? Ancient art gives us both versions, so we're left guessing. Just imagine the endless arguments between two rival washermen guilds about proper rinsing form. The rinsing stage was often a social moment, too. As you stood ankle-deep in water, squeezing tunics in the sun, you'd likely be chatting, complaining about the dust storms, trading tips about mosquito bites, maybe whispering about the high priest's new sandals, were they really gold-threaded, or just shiny bronze. And sometimes, you'd just sigh, because linen, once wet, is heavy. Dragging it back up the bank was a chore, a slippery, slow, shoulder-straining chore. And yet, there was a kind of peace in it. The warm sun on your back, the soft trickle of river water, the knowledge that another tunic was now Nile fresh and ready to dry. Well, ready to dry, if the wind cooperated. Now that your linen tunics were rinsed and dripping wet, it was time to dry them. And in Egypt, drying laundry wasn't just practical, it was practically spiritual. With the desert sun blazing overhead and not a rain cloud in sight for months, you'd think drying would be easy. But oh no. Even the sun had opinions. Laundry was typically laid out on flat rocks or draped over woven reed fences. Some families used roof edges, turning their homes into sun-powered drying racks. Others stretched rope lines between palm trees. Occasionally, people just used the ground, especially out in rural areas, where the earth was as dry as an old sandal. But here's the kicker: linen, the fabric of choice, was notoriously stubborn. It didn't absorb water easily, which meant it also didn't let it go easily. So yes, it dried slowly, and you had to keep flipping it, patting it, and making sure it didn't crust into some oddly shaped tunic sculpture. Dust storms were another headache. Imagine spending all morning rinsing clothes, only for a lazy gust of wind to blow in a fresh layer of sand. That's right, you'd have cleanish clothes coated in ancient dessert seasoning. Some people got clever and used inverted baskets to cover drying laundry, like little linen tents. One charming detail. Some wealthier households had servants whose only job was to chase birds away from the clothes. Ancient Egyptian birds were curious creatures, and for whatever reason, they loved pecking at wet sleeves. Maybe they thought it was worms. Maybe they just enjoyed chaos. Scholars still argue whether drying clothes was considered a religiously clean act or just an everyday chore. Some texts suggest prayers were whispered while drying garments, especially for funerary linen. After all, wrapping a mummy in a damp shroud would be unpleasant. Drying was also when people inspected their work. You'd check for missed spots, stubborn stains, or holes. If the tunic had survived washing, rinsing, and drying without falling apart, it was declared a success, or at least good enough to wear until the flood season. There was also a curious tradition among some washerwomen. A good tunic was gently slapped before folding. It was believed to keep wrinkles away. Whether it worked or not, who knows? But it made for a satisfying little clap to end the laundry day. And now, with the last sleeve finally dry and flapping lazily in the breeze, the only thing left to do was fold. But not before one last hopeful glance at the horizon, checking for dust storms, or curious birds, or possibly your neighbor trying to steal your tunic. Folding laundry in ancient Egypt was not exactly the crisp, KonMari kind of affair you might imagine. Once everything was dried and hopefully not pecked to pieces by birds, it was brought back inside, still warm from the sun, and laid out for folding. Now, linen doesn't behave like your average modern fabric. It wrinkles like a toddler's face after tasting a lemon. So, folding had to be done carefully, with gentle pressing and a lot of smoothing by hand. Some households use smooth stones to help press folds, especially if they wanted the linen to look fancy. Think of it like the ancient equivalent of an iron, but slightly more geological. Servants in wealthier homes were often trained in the art of neat folding. Yes, there's some indication that folding hierarchy existed. Tunics for ceremonial use were folded tighter, more compactly, and even perfumed with herbs like myrrh or crushed lotus petals. Everyday work tunics, let's just say they got the basic crease and a quick pat. Here's something odd: some Egyptologists believe that folding clothes a certain way may have had magical associations. Certain directions, especially folding garments toward the east, were linked to the sun god Ra. Whether this was superstition or just tradition passed down from someone's very spiritual great-grandmother, we don't know. Historians still argue whether folding styles differed across regions or if this is just wishful academic laundry dreaming. Children were often brought in to help during this stage, partly for learning and partly because small hands were useful for tucking in folds. One ancient scroll even complains about a child folding a tunic inside out and hiding the mistake under a basket. Some things never change, and here's a detail you didn't expect: folding wasn't always done indoors. Some folks believed that folding under direct sunlight sealed impurity, so they'd spread out mats in courtyards and fold each item like they were performing a sunlit ritual. Very Instagrammable. If they'd had phones, family garments went into reed baskets or wooden boxes. Special linens like those used in temple service or burials were wrapped in palm fiber ties and sometimes even labeled with ink. Imagine unrolling one of those centuries later and finding Uncle Hepta's temple robe. Do not touch. And just when you thought the process was over, some households added one more step: the incense closet. Folded clothes were placed in small storage rooms with burning incense or perfumed oils nearby. Not on them just enough to let the scent drift in. You might end up smelling faintly of cinnamon, or frankincense, or something oddly sweet and musky. All in all, folding was both a practical task and a quiet ritual. It marked the end of the long, soapy journey from dirty cloth to clean, respectable attire. And once everything was folded, stacked, and perfumed, you earned the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a tea break, probably a jug of cool beer and a seat under a palm tree. Now that the laundry was washed, dried, folded, and faintly scented like a sacred ceremony, what came next was, of course, storage. And in a world where closets did not yet exist and mothballs were not a thing, the Egyptians had to get creative. Most households stored their clothes in reed baskets, wooden chests, or, in wealthier homes, elaborately carved stone jars. Yes, stone jars. Because when you've gone through all the effort of beating your laundry clean with sand and cow urine, you really don't want it to get dusty again. These storage containers weren't randomly placed around the house. They were usually tucked away in cool corners, sometimes even partially buried in sand floors to keep them cooler. Some families even lined their storage boxes with old cloths infused with oil or herbs to deter insects. It wasn't foolproof, but it did smell pleasant. And there's something oddly cozy about pulling out your favorite tunic and catching a whiff of basil and cedarwood. But as with everything else in ancient Egypt, there were social layers to laundry storage. The everyday linen of farmers might be rolled and placed in simple baskets, while a priest's ceremonial robes could be wrapped in papyrus and kept in specially painted cabinets. One particularly well-preserved chest found near Luxor had compartments labeled for specific garments: head wraps, under tunics, outer wraps, and yes, even sandals. And because humans have always been humans, garment borrowing was a thing, especially among siblings. Letters from ancient times include petty complaints like, "My sister took my sash and has not returned it for 4 days." An early fashion feud, perhaps. Interestingly, wealthier households often employed a linen keeper, someone whose job was to manage garments like a one-person walk-in closet. They were responsible for rotating clothing with the seasons, yes, even in the desert, repairing torn hems, and making sure the family always looked their best. Imagine managing all that without any modern tools like spreadsheets. Historians still debate whether this role was mostly symbolic or involved everyday tasks. But one thing is clear, clothes mattered a lot. Not just for modesty or warmth, but as signs of social status. The whiter and finer your linen, the more respected you appeared. That's why so much effort was put into preventing yellowing or stains. Before storing clothes long-term, many were sprinkled with natron powder, the same salt mixture used in mummification. It helped dry out moisture and keep mildew away. There were also ceremonial garments, worn only during temple rituals or big festivals. These robes were often decorated with gold thread or beads. When put away, they weren't just folded but carefully wrapped in linen scrolls, almost like precious scrolls. Sometimes they were even stored with protective charms, because the Egyptians believed the gods were always watching. Now picture waking up in an ancient Egyptian village. It's early morning. The Nile lies calm, ibis birds wander through the shallows, and you can hear the soft sounds of laundry being washed by the riverbank. But before washing, laundry had to be gathered. This wasn't a quick grab and go. Laundry day started early, involved some grumbling, and often required teamwork. Most families owned only 2 or 3 sets of clothes. They rotated them carefully, so laundry had to be timed just right. Wash one set, wear another. If both were dirty, well, there was a lot of standing around hoping the sun dried things fast. Before heading to the river, clothes were shaken out, checked for damage, and mended by hand if needed. Needles came from bone or copper, and thread was made from flax fibers. These repair sessions were social occasions, often happening in courtyards where neighbors chatted, shared news, or caught up on gossip. Ancient group therapy, really. Once ready, the clothes were packed into woven reed baskets or carried over the shoulder. The walk to the Nile was intentional. The riverbank's soft sand made an ideal scrubbing surface, and the water was free. Although some had private wells, many preferred washing communally. Here's a charming detail. Families washed clothes together, mothers, children, even grandmothers. There was a rhythm to it: dunk, scrub, beat, rinse, twist. Between loads, they'd rest with some dates, bread, and shade beneath a sycamore fig tree. Records show children sometimes turned laundry into games, competing to scrub faster or twist water out more quickly. It might seem small, but it shows how chores were also moments of shared joy. Of course, not everyone loved laundry day. One ancient note carved on a potsherd reads that a teenager named Nenni sulked by the reeds and refused to help. Teenagers haven't changed much, it seems. Scholars also debate if laundry spots near temples were considered more sacred. What's clear is that public washing areas became lively social hubs, not just for cleaning clothes, but for gossip, recipe swaps, and even matchmaking. Yes, arranging marriages while wringing out tunics, very efficient. And if anyone thought they could skip laundry duty, Egyptian mothers were quick to catch slackers. If you can carry water, you can rinse your sash, they'd say. Probably. So now, you're kneeling beside the Nile, cloth in hand, sun warming your back, and you're wondering how exactly did they clean anything without soap? Well, for starters, there was a kind of soap. Just not the bubbly, lavender-scented bar you're picturing. The Egyptians had something better suited to their needs: a gritty, homemade mix of ash and clay, sometimes blended with natron, the same salty substance they used in mummification. A sort of ancient detergent meets sand scrub combo. Not gentle on the skin, but excellent for getting sweat and Nile mud out of flax fibers. Most everyday folks, though, skipped the natron and went for elbow grease and repetition. The real workhorse was the sand along the Nile's edge. Fine, soft, and just abrasive enough to scrub dirt out of fibers without destroying the cloth like Mother Nature's washboard. Here's how it worked. You'd wet the garment in river water, lay it out on a smooth, sun-warmed stone or patch of sand, then pound or stomp it with your feet. Yep, laundry by foot. Not quite a spa treatment, but oddly rhythmic. Stomp, rinse, twist, repeat. Some women even sang during this process, setting a tempo that made the work feel almost like dance. And remember, the Nile's current helped too. Garments would be anchored with stones and left to soak, swaying gently in the water like sleepy jellyfish, while their owners took a break or a nap. Laundry was tiring, After all, now here's the quirky part. Some evidence suggests wealthier households used a solution made from fermented urine. Yes, you heard that right. Ancient ammonia. Don't worry, they rinsed it thoroughly afterward. Hopefully. The logic was sound. Ammonia breaks down oils and grease. The smell? Well, let's just say people were a little more noseblind back then. A particularly amusing scribble on an ancient ostracon, basically a pottery shard used as a notebook, reads, "The tunic of my husband stinks like camel breath. I blame the boy who washed it." Laundry complaints, it turns out, are timeless. Even drying clothes had its rituals. Wick garments were spread across bushes, stones, or even small wooden frames. The hot Egyptian sun did the rest. But beware, if you let your linen linger too long, you risked it turning stiff as parchment, not exactly bedtime wear material. And here's a curious theory still tossed around by historians. Some believe special drying racks near temples were meant not just for clean laundry, but to purify garments through sacred proximity. It's speculative, sure, but in a culture where even shaving your eyebrows for a dead cat was a thing, nothing's off the table. By midday, the riverbank would look like a scene from a very quiet, very sandy fashion show. Tunics of all sizes fluttering in the breeze, children chasing ibises between them, and mothers reminding everyone that clean laundry doesn't fold itself. Now that you've seen how the laundry got clean, or at least mostly clean, let's drift into how the ancient Egyptians kept their bodies fresh without what we think of as modern soap or deodorant. First, picture yourself waking up in a mud brick house where the morning light filters through reed mats. No hot showers, no fancy lotions. Instead, personal hygiene was a ritual blending practicality, nature, and a pinch of superstition. You might begin your day with a splash from a clay or alabaster jar filled with Nile water. This water wasn't just any water, it was thought to be life-giving, purifying, and sacred. Egyptians even used it to rinse their mouths, believing it kept teeth strong and breath tolerable. As for washing, the same gritty mixtures from laundry often doubled as body cleansers. The ash and natron blend was harsh, so Egyptians would add scented oils to soften the experience. Olive oil, castor oil, and fragrant resins were favorites. After scrubbing, you'd rub oil into your skin to moisturize and create a subtle scent, kind of like the original lotion and perfume combo. An intriguing detail is that Egyptians were quite fond of kohl, the black powder used to line their eyes. It wasn't just cosmetic. Kohl protected their eyes from the sun's glare and, some say, from eye infections. You could say it was their version of sunglasses and antiseptic all in one. Interestingly, body hair removal was part of their hygiene routine too. Both men and women used sharpened stones, pumice, or sugar-based waxes to remove hair, something many viewers today might find painfully familiar. The smooth, hairless skin wasn't just about looks, it also helped avoid pests like fleas and lice in the hot climate. Here's where things get slightly whimsical. Wealthier Egyptians even kept little personal servants whose job was to keep their masters smelling fresh by carrying fragrant cones of perfumed wax on their heads. As the wax melted slowly, it released gentle aromas. Imagine that, a walking, sweating air freshener. Historians still debate how widely this fragrant cone practice spread beyond the elite. Some suggest it was more symbolic, a status marker rather than daily reality for most people. And you probably won't be surprised that tooth care was a thing too. Ancient toothbrushes were twigs chewed to a frayed end, and toothpaste was a gritty paste made from powdered ox hooves, ashes, and burnt eggshells. Not minty fresh, but hey, better than nothing. At the end of the day, Egyptians might cleanse their bodies again before bed, sometimes even taking small dips in private baths. The Nile, after all, wasn't just for washing clothes but also a place for gentle bathing rituals. With all that scrubbing, oiling, and kohl application, you can see the Egyptians took cleanliness seriously, but with an approach that balanced function and flair. Next time you gripe about your skincare routine, just remember someone once rubbed animal fat and ashes on their face, hoping for a bit of glow. By now, you've got a pretty good idea about how the ancient Egyptians kept their clothes and bodies clean. But what about their hair? Hair care in ancient times was surprisingly sophisticated and sometimes downright theatrical. Imagine sitting under the warm Egyptian sun while a skilled hairdresser works through your locks. Egyptians valued hair highly. It was a symbol of beauty, status, and even health. Both men and women took pride in their hairstyles, which ranged from shaved heads to intricate braids, and sometimes even elaborate wigs. Shaving was common, especially among priests and nobles, to stay clean and avoid lice. Remember, lice could turn any royal party into a microscopic nightmare. Wigs made from human hair, sheep's wool, or even plant fibers were crafted and worn not only to impress but also to protect the scalp from the scorching sun. Some wigs were scented with oils and resins, so you literally smelled fancy. An interesting tidbit is that hair dyes were popular too. Henna, a plant-based dye, was commonly used to tint hair a reddish-brown shade. Egyptians believed different colors had magical properties. For example, red hair was sometimes linked to the god Set, associated with strength and chaos. Now, hair care involved more than just cutting and styling. People used special combs made from ivory or wood and applied hair oils made from castor, moringa, or sesame seeds. These oils kept the hair soft, shiny, and manageable in the dry climate. Here's a quirky fact. Some scholars suggest that hair removal wasn't limited to the body but also extended to eyebrows and eyelashes, shaping the face for aesthetic or religious reasons. The famous kohl eyeliner might have served to highlight the eyes after these meticulous grooming steps. Historians still argue whether wigs were more common among the lower classes for practical reasons or exclusively a luxury for the wealthy. Evidence points to both, but one thing's clear, hair mattered a lot in ancient Egypt. You probably wouldn't last long under all that hair care if you're not used to slow, detailed rituals. But it does make you appreciate the next time you just throw your hair into a ponytail without a second thought. Now that you've gently settled into the hair care rituals, let's wander into the daily grooming habits of the average Egyptian. Because personal hygiene was a full-time job, not just a quick splash of water before breakfast. You can picture a morning scene by the Nile. The sun is rising softly, and Egyptians are starting their daily routines. Washing was more than a splash, it was a ritual. People used natron, a naturally occurring mix of sodium carbonate and baking soda, as an early soap substitute. This powder helped cleanse skin and remove oils and dirt, leaving a fresh feeling despite the dusty environment. Teeth cleaning might surprise you. Egyptians didn't have toothbrushes as we know them. Instead, they chewed on thin twigs from aromatic trees like Salvador persica, the toothbrush tree. These twigs frayed at the ends and acted like natural toothbrushes, while their fragrant oils helped freshen breath. It's said this practice is still alive in some parts of the world today. An odd but fascinating practice involved a mixture of crushed eggshells and ashes rubbed on teeth, which some think might have been an early form of toothpaste. But historians still argue whether these mixtures were mostly cosmetic or actually effective against tooth decay. Hair removal was a big part of daily hygiene, too. Many Egyptians removed body hair to maintain cleanliness, and smooth skin often considered a mark of beauty and purity. They used pumice stones and tweezers made from seashells or metal to pluck stray hairs, showing patience and attention to detail. Waxing-like substances made from resin and honey were used for larger areas, though this could be a sticky, slow process. Ancient Egyptians were also fond of scented oils and perfumes. Imagine a morning after your wash where you're dabbing fragrant oils extracted from flowers, herbs, and spices onto your skin. These scents not only masked odors but were believed to have spiritual benefits and even health properties. One quirky fact: some tomb paintings depict men and women wearing ornate headdresses or wigs decorated with flowers and beads during grooming rituals, turning daily hygiene into a mini celebration. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we talked about? Personal care products could be just as bizarre but were deeply woven into daily life. You might feel a bit overwhelmed trying to keep up with these leisurely routines, but this detailed self-care was a form of mindfulness in ancient times. As the sun climbs higher, imagine the scent of freshly applied oils mingling with the sounds of bustling markets, where food and daily life intertwine. Now, let's take a slow stroll through what ancient Egyptians ate, and how their meals connected to cleanliness and health. Bread was the heart of their diet. Imagine warm, dense loaves made from emmer wheat, sometimes coarse and sometimes finely sifted, depending on who you were. Bakers used large, clay ovens, and the process could take hours. A lesser-known fact is that they often added ingredients like dates, herbs, or even carob to sweeten or flavor bread. Alongside bread came beer, a staple drink with a cloudy, thick consistency, quite different from the clear lagers we know today. This beer was mildly alcoholic and rich in nutrients, sometimes thick enough to eat with a spoon. Workers and farmers depended on it for energy and hydration during long days under the sun. Vegetables such as onions, leeks, garlic, and lettuce were daily staples, valued not just for flavor but for their medicinal properties. Onions, for example, were thought to increase strength, while garlic was believed to ward off illness. One peculiar culinary tradition involved the use of natron not just for cleaning, but occasionally as a food preservative or additive, creating a curious salty tang. You might picture a leisurely family meal, but historians still argue whether these meals were eaten sitting on the ground or on low stools. The evidence varies by region and class. Here's a fun tidbit. Ancient Egyptians loved sweet treats made from honey, figs, and dates. These sweets were often offered to gods or eaten during special occasions, showing how food was tied to spirituality and celebration. The dining scene also included fish from the Nile, and sometimes small game like ducks or geese, but large-scale meat consumption was rare due to expense. Instead, legumes and pulses rounded out the diet, providing essential protein. Interestingly, meals were often communal and involved shared dishes, a social ritual that bonded families and communities. If you're imagining all these flavors and textures, you might feel ready for a late-night snack yourself, though nothing quite like ancient bread and beer. Probably. After a day of bathing, grooming, and eating, your thoughts might drift toward how the ancient Egyptians kept their homes cool and comfortable, especially in the blazing heat of the desert sun. Let's slowly explore the architectural tricks and daily life hacks they used to stay comfortable. Most Egyptian homes were built with mud bricks, which might sound simple but actually worked quite well to insulate against both heat and cold. Thick walls kept interiors pleasantly cool during the day, like nature's own air conditioning. Roofs were flat, allowing for sleeping outside on hot nights, a practice that seems quite appealing when you imagine the starry sky above. Windows were small and often covered with latticework or cloth to filter the harsh sunlight without blocking airflow. In wealthier homes, fans made from feathers or palm leaves were used, though these were usually operated by servants. It's a gentle reminder of how labor was woven into everyday comfort. The ancient Egyptians also used water in clever ways to cool spaces. They hung wet mats in doorways or windows, which, when the breeze passed through, helped lower temperatures by evaporation. This natural cooling method is still used in some parts of the world today. Historians still argue whether these cooling methods were widespread or mostly limited to wealthier households, but evidence points to a clever use of available resources everywhere. Another quaint detail, Egyptians loved scented oils not only for their aroma but also for the cooling sensation they provided when applied to skin, sort of like ancient aloe vera. Many homes had courtyards with shade trees and small pools, creating peaceful retreats within the bustle of daily life. Imagine the gentle sound of water and rustling leaves as a soft background lullaby. If you think about it, these practical comforts might make you feel a little envious of their laid-back evenings, especially before modern air conditioning. Remember, though, these were simple pleasures, carefully crafted for maximum relaxation after a long day. As the evening shadows lengthen, it's time to consider how ancient Egyptians prepared for rest, because even back then, a good night's sleep was essential. And they had their own bedtime rituals to help. Most Egyptians slept on wooden or reed beds, often quite low to the ground. Some wealthier folks even had mattresses stuffed with reeds or palm fibers. You can almost feel the coolness of the linen sheets, soft to the touch, especially in contrast to the warm, drier outside. Nighttime was often scented with incense or fragrant oils, think sweet myrrh and calming lotus flower. These scents were not just for pleasure but also to help soothe the mind and body, much like a modern lavender pillow spray. Interestingly, some scholars argue whether these scents had spiritual significance or were simply practical. Bedtime stories aren't recorded, but lullabies likely echoed softly in homes, passed down through generations. Ancient texts sometimes mention prayers or hymns said before sleep, seeking protection from evil spirits lurking in the dark, a gentle mix of superstition and comfort. One quirky fact, Egyptians believed that sleeping with a small statue of a protective deity nearby could ward off bad dreams. So, you might imagine a tiny bees or tauret figure sitting quietly by the bedside, keeping watch. Historians still debate how widespread these sleep aids were among different social classes. After all, or royal tomb might have more luxurious bedtime practices than a humble farmer's hut. The nighttime was also a time for rest and rejuvenation in preparation for the next day's work under the sun, just like today. If you think about it, the idea of a simple, soothing bedtime routine isn't so different from modern life. It's a reminder that no matter the era, we all need a little peace before we drift off. As dawn approached, the cycle of Egyptian life prepared to begin anew, and so did the ancient rhythms of cleaning and care, this time for the body, not just the clothes. Morning routines often started with washing the face and hands in cool Nile water, which was considered both refreshing and purifying. And like modern soap, they used a combination of natural oils and alkaline salts. Think of it as an early exfoliant that left skin soft but not irritated. Personal grooming was important, especially for the elite. They had special combs made from bone or wood, and tweezers for removing unwanted hair because, yes, the ancient Egyptians were quite meticulous about hair removal, often shaving heads to avoid lice. Imagine waking up and realizing your smooth scalp is a sign of cleanliness and status. Cosmetics played a big role, too. Black color on the eyes was not only fashionable but also thought to reduce glare and protect against eye infections. This blend of beauty and practicality highlights how appearance and health were closely linked. A surprising tidbit, perfumes were sometimes worn in small containers called ingent jars, which people carried around to refresh their scent throughout the day, a bit like ancient pocket-sized aromat. Therapy. Historians still argue how common such elaborate grooming was among everyday Egyptians versus the wealthy classes, but evidence suggests a broad appreciation for cleanliness. As you imagine these slow morning rituals, it's comforting to know that from the first Nile splash to the last linen fold, the ancient Egyptians crafted a lifestyle that balanced care, comfort, and simple pleasures. Now, as we gently close the pages on this slow walk through laundry day in ancient Egypt, let yourself drift with the calm rhythm of river life and warm desert winds. And now, as the sun sets slowly over the vast sands and the soft sounds of the Nile carry on through time, you can feel the quiet peace of a day well lived, even thousands of years ago. The hum of ancient routine, simple, practical, and gentle, lingers like a soft lullaby. Imagine the warmth of the sun fading, the cool breeze whispering through palm leaves, and the distant murmur of water, inviting you to rest. In this timeless moment, all the little details from the rustling linen to the faint scent of lotus fade into calm. You don't need to rush. Let the peacefulness settle deep inside you, like the slow flow of the river itself. Sleep now comes softly, wrapping you like a cozy cloth, as ancient Egypt's quiet rituals fade into dreams, sweet dreams.